Topic 2 is concerned with the purpose, rationale, and justification of your program. For any learning program or any qualification that you're designing, you need to make absolutely sure that your purpose is located within current contexts of learning and work. You need to have a strong purpose. It needs to be evidence-based. You need to be able to write a good, strong rationale, and you need to be able to justify it in terms of current evidence. If we go back to Susan Tui's program design model that we looked at briefly in topic 1, we can see that before we start designing, we need to be sure of the context for the programs, the stakeholder needs and interests, and students' needs and interests. There are other contexts that need to be considered as well, and these can be identified as follows: the higher education context, the world of work context, disciplinary context, institutional context, and pedagogic contexts. Starting with the higher education context, we need to find out what key policy frameworks and considerations in the South African higher education context should be taken into account in developing a qualification. I'm only going to touch on a couple of these here, but there may be many more that apply to your particular context. First, higher education is being shaped by neoliberal economic policies and rationales, partly to ensure that our programs are linked to employment opportunities for our graduates. Secondly, we need to realize that the higher education policy context is framed by 5 pillars: a single nationally coordinated system of higher education, which is given expression in the NQF, increased access and raised participation rates, increased responsiveness to societal and economic needs, program differentiation as laid out in the higher education qualification sub-framework, and development of institutional niche areas, which is really important for a university of technology like CPUT. Thirdly, the knowledge economy in which we are operating is shifting towards new forms of knowledge production, from what Gibbons refers to as Mode 1, disciplinary knowledge production and dissemination, which is organized around disciplinary research, and which has always been the domain of higher education, to Mode 2, interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary forms of knowledge production, which is organized around problem solving with respect to a particular application. And a third mode of knowledge production is being proposed, a Mode 3 knowledge production, which is being termed distributed knowledge production. And this is characterized by complex project partnerships between universities, industry, government, and civil society, who collaborate in research, application, and development, often for the social good, informed by systems thinking. So the role of knowledge production is shifting very rapidly away from universities as being the sole institutions for knowledge production into the wider world, where civil society is engaging with universities as well in producing knowledge. So this brings us to consider what the role of higher education is in the knowledge economy, and the tension between the two worlds of knowledge, the economics of knowledge, knowledge for employment, and the sociology of knowledge. We need to consider what roles our qualifications play in terms of labor market imperatives and employment imperatives and educational imperatives and social imperatives, and make conscious decisions in relation to these 3 components when we plan our qualifications. So how do they fit within, how do they meet labor market needs, how do they meet education needs, and how do they meet society's needs? This brings us on to consider the world of work context when designing our qualifications and learning programs. So the question we would ask would be, how will the proposed new qualification or learning program address the needs of a diverse range of stakeholders, including professional bodies, employer organizations, and industry? And then what evidence do you need to support this argument? And that is where we need to go and do a situational analysis. So in order to answer these questions, we need to conduct a situational analysis of the context and consult a range of stakeholders. We also need to realize, so those would be people like employers, advisory committees, industry bodies, professional bodies, CETAs, and so on and so forth. We also need to realize that there will always be a loose fit between the world of work between qualifications and jobs. It is interesting to note here that South Africa follows the UK and the USA in having a liberal market economy, where the labour market is used to match graduates to jobs, and higher education therefore follows a supply-driven approach based on an educational logic. Many countries in Europe, on the other hand, Germany being a prime example, have coordinated market economies, where educational institutions, employers, and governing bodies work closely in partnership to match graduates to jobs. In this case, higher education follows a demand-driven approach, which is based on an employment logic. In our labour market approach, we can consult DHET's scarce skills lists, although these are not updated regularly and may be quite generic and therefore not very helpful. And this is a mistake that people often make when they're developing qualifications, is to put too much store on the scarce skills lists, because they're often very out of date and are very general. For instance, they might say things like engineering is a scarce skills. Now, you can't get much more generic than that. If you're offering a particular specialist program, you need to be able to see, are there scarce skills related to this particular program, this particular specialism, and not just engineering in general. Some professional bodies, like EXA, can accommodate both kinds of logic through standard setting processes. But the implications of this for program and curriculum development is that it is important to gather the data on the work context that is relevant to your particular field of study and to your qualification, okay, to support your rationale for the program and to ensure it is fit for purpose. We need to understand the world of work, knowledge, and skills ecosystem that relates to the qualification and the program. And we need to ensure that we are addressing the changing needs of work, learning for the future, such as collaboration, problem solving, increased autonomy, and decreasing specialization in favor of more generalist competencies. It might be useful to look at the International Standards Classification of Occupations, especially skills level 3 and 4, and compare these with the occupational levels we have in our occupational framework in South Africa, and also the European framework for the classification of occupational tasks, to locate our programs more generally in the national and international field and give us a stronger sense of what the focus of our programs are. And finally, this has implications for whether we adopt a vocational approach towards a narrowly defined occupation in our qualifications, or a vocational stream approach, which allows specialization in a particular field, or a lateral movement into related occupations, and in this way enhancing educational and occupational mobility and progress for our students. Next, in a disciplinary context, we need to ask, what are the disciplinary ways of knowing, doing, and being that you wish to achieve in the proposed new qualification? Your starting point should be with the higher education qualification sub-framework, establishing the qualification type, purpose, characteristics, total credit value, and the program design, including subjects and modules. You also need to consider on which pathway it is located, and this is really important with the pathway on the HEQSF. So is it following a general formative pathway? Unlikely, because this is more the domain of academic universities, research-based university. Is it following professional pathway, in which case there needs to be a balance between theory and practice aimed at an occupational vocational stream? Or is it following a strongly vocational pathway with a strong focus on practical knowledge and skills development? The different forms of knowledge that will construct the learning program must be identified from this and their relationship to each other. So by following the HEQSF and teasing out these various components, you can then see how the different forms of knowledge actually fit together. This slide helps us to see the different qualifications in relation to each other, from highly vocational on the right-hand side of the slide to general formative on the left-hand side of the slide. and where so many of our professionally orientated qualifications lie, which is more or less in the center. And this has implications for the knowledge balance in the qualification. So when we are developing a postgraduate diploma, for instance, we need to be clear about how it differs from a bachelor honours qualification and design the learning program accordingly. So PG DIP follows a vocational professional pathway. It's aimed at working professionals to enable them to undertake advanced reflection and development by means of a systematic survey of current thinking, practice and research methods in an area of specialization, which differs quite profoundly from the bachelor honours. The nature of the qualification also differs from the honours in that it is focused on the application of knowledge in a range of contexts. Okay. Finally, this representation of how knowledge is recontextualized in curricula of different types of qualifications helps us make decisions about how we draw on and construct knowledge in the curriculum. So in general academic qualifications, the logic of the curriculum is the discipline, whereas in a practical vocational qualification, the logic of the curriculum is in the working practice. In vocational professional qualifications, such as at CPUT, the logic of curriculum is derived from the demands of practice, yet the principles informing the practice are derived from theory, which is quite different from theoretically based curricula. Now, I'm not going to go into this in any detail here now, but we will come back to it later in the course. The third context we need to consider here is the institutional context. This is the fourth context, the institutional context we need to consider when planning a new qualification or a learning program. So, in terms of our strategic positioning as a University of Technology and partnerships, what are the institutional policies that need to be considered? What is our strategic position and partnerships? Okay. What are the institutional policies such as Vision 2020-2030, the RTI blueprint, our vision and mission? How does the qualification specifically, and not in general terms, promote institutional, faculty and departmental strategic objectives? And again, this is another area where people commonly make a mistake, and they quote from the CPUT vision or mission, and they say our qualification meets these requirements, without saying how it meets the requirements. So the necessity to be absolutely specific about how it meets those requirements or those contexts. Very important is the capacity and infrastructure to offer the program. Do we have the staff? Do we have the facilities? Do we have the equipment, the infrastructure, the supportive culture, and the structure for staff? So not only do we have the culture, but is there a structure for developing staff? Do they have access to training and technology use? Do they have access for curriculum development training? The institutional context also concerns our students. So how do our programs meet student needs? How does the nature of the qualification and the delivery strategy meet their needs? How does it articulate with other qualifications and subjects, and how robust are these other qualifications that it articulates with? And finally, our programs must address graduate capabilities of technology, so technological capability and foresight, resilience and problem solving, relational capability and ethical capability. And I'll leave you to read up on these and ensure that you understand what they are and perhaps how, and certainly how they can be integrated into your teaching program. And the last context we need to consider is our pedagogical context. Pedagogy is key to ensuring the best learning experience possible. So we need to consider how we can make use of educational technology for this purpose. Educational technology can address many of the problems faced by higher education regarding the exponential growth of knowledge, our changing student populations, the changing world of work, and how modes of learning are becoming more informal and distributed. Our students today therefore need to know not only the what and the how, but where to find the reliable knowledge they need. At the same time, education, higher education particularly, is becoming unbundled, and component parts may be offered together with external partners. There are MOOCs, massive open online courses, online degrees, private universities, corporate universities, open education movements, etc., all offering different forms of education and learning. CPUT's Vision 2030, although still in draft form, is also an important context. It emphasizes flexible and blended modes of delivery and pedagogy, including collaborative learning, interdisciplinary learning, project-based learning, a greater choice in learning pathways, and so on. And it'll be interesting to see how the final form of Vision 2030 pans out. So a question to consider is, how will your pedagogical approaches support the purpose and the aims and objectives of the program? What strategies will you use to develop lifelong learning capabilities? And all of these, blended learning, authentic tasks, learners as co-creators of knowledge, head, heart, hands, or integrated approach, are all essential in conceptualizing flexible pedagogies. And finally, having gathered current information on all these contexts, you are then in a position to start writing the purpose statement and the rationale for your qualification or learning program. This rationale and purpose statement will be guided by the following key questions that you need to ask. What purposes will the envisaged new qualification in your department serve? How will it address educational and economic imperatives? Does the purpose statement adequately address these issues? Are the aims and objectives which follow on from the purpose statement and summarize what the program is intending to achieve, the intended curriculum, are these clearly defined? So thank you and good luck with compiling your purpose statement and rationale. I'll leave you with some references that you would find useful. You will definitely need to have a look at the Higher Education's Qualification Sub-Framework and the white paper for post-school education and training. Thank you.